What up, y'all? This is Patrick Hayes. In this video, I want to talk about a really powerful communication key. A communication key that all conscious relationships use. So you want to have a conscious relationship with somebody, you have to be aware of this communication key in order to truly be transparent and truly understand each other. So what I want to do is, in this video, at first, I'm going to point out a few of the really common communication flaws that we have. I'm going to bring some language to it and some things that we can be aware of when we're communicating. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about this communication key and how this key helps us to overcome those communication barriers. Okay, so one of the first communication barriers that is ultra common, you see it all over the place, is something that I call being a one-way street or talking at somebody. You see this everywhere, and this is where somebody is not tuned in enough to another person, doesn't have an intention of communicating with the other person, but rather is interested in just expressing whatever it is that they want to express. And in many situations, they might as well be talking to a wall. They're just talking at somebody. And I'm sure all of you have experienced having a conversation with somebody that is just talking at you. Like they're in a trance. They just keep on going and going and going. Now, in their defense, sometimes extroverts do this as a form of processing, because extroverts oftentimes can't process on their own. So understanding that can be useful. And if you are an extrovert, this is something to pay attention to. If you need to speak to somebody else in order to process something, that if you're conscious of that, that you can at least express that to the person, like, listen, I'm trying to process this thing. Would you mind letting me bounce my ideas off of you? And then they understand that you're not actually looking to have a deep back and forth with the person, but you're looking more to just hear your ideas out loud and process with somebody else there to kind of like, just energetically help the process happen. So this is something to be aware of, and this is something that, as I get into the key will, resolve this. Another thing that is really common is something that I like to call associative autopilot. When someone's on associative autopilot, it's similar to the first one, but it's not quite as disconnected. It's where you're talking to somebody and that person hears the words that you're saying, but instead of responding to the meaning behind the words, or you specifically, like you may be trying to express something and you're using words, but instead of hearing actually what you're trying to express, the person hears just the words, and then they're on associative autopilot. So whatever they associate with that word is then how they start reacting to it. So they take that word and they just start spouting out the first thing that comes off the top of their head that is associated with the words and their interpretation of those words, as opposed to the interpretation of what you're trying to communicate behind the words. See, words are just symbols, right? So when we use words, we're actually trying to communicate something beneath the words. But when we develop different associations with words and we get stuck in just like the word realm, the symbol realm, then it's easy for us to not actually hear what the person is saying, but actually just respond to the words that are coming out of their mouth. And this becomes really confusing when people have like stigmas towards certain words, or words are like trigger words. And this really gets in the way of communication, because somebody may say something like, conspiracy or conspiracy theory, or they might mention something like Jesus, or some sort of word that has a lot of, or God. So a word that has like a lot of buzz behind it. And you'll see if somebody's on associative autopilot, when they hear that word, they're automatically just click into their belief or their programmed response for whatever that word triggered within them. It's almost like they've been programmed. And when you say that word, it's like a code, and then they have like an automatic response to it. So being on associative autopilot is something to look out for. Are you actually listening to the person, or are you listening just for the words and then responding to whatever your preconceived ideas about those words are? So this is what I like to call associative autopilot, and this is something also to be aware of. Now, the next thing to be aware of is how confirmation bias shows up in conversations. Now, confirmation bias is that's a deeper subject, and we could do a whole video on that. But in the context of relationships, confirmation bias essentially is, in the holistic perspective, confirmation bias is a bias to confirm what you already believe. So it's a bias to look for evidence to just basically confirm what your paradigm already is. So how this shows up in relationships is if you have a confirmation bias, then you're never going to truly be able to understand anybody that has an expression or an idea that conflicts with your paradigm. Because if you're only looking for evidence to support your own understanding of things or your own beliefs, then anytime somebody has something that conflicts with that, as you're trying to listen to them, you're going to miss whatever points that they're making if that threatens your way of seeing the world. In other words, in order to truly understand someone, you have to be willing to be wrong. You have to be willing to set aside your beliefs for the moment so you can totally empathize and harmonize and resonate with what that person is saying, regardless of whether that person is saying something that aligns with your beliefs or not. And it's beyond just being able to notice in the moment that that person has a belief that doesn't align with your beliefs, and then from that moment forward, seeing them as incorrect, but still understanding in a sense where they're coming from. That doesn't actually help you understand someone. That's still confirmation bias in action. So let me explain that again. So if somebody's saying something that conflicts with your beliefs, but you immediately move into a position where you're perceiving them as like, okay, well, this person is incorrect or they're wrong or I don't agree with them, but I can still understand the point that they're trying to make. This is still a gap between true understanding and communication, right? You may understand the point that they're trying to make on some level, but to truly empathize with somebody, you have to harmonize with them in that moment so that you actually truly see it from their perspective and for the moment, at least resonate with their perspective. This is what empathy truly is, right? So you're not forfeiting your beliefs. You're just setting them aside for the moment in which you actually resonate with that person and understand from their perspective and agree in that moment with them in order to truly know and understand where they are. And this requires you to be willing to be wrong, to not be afraid to let go of your beliefs and your paradigm in the moment while you're communicating with the person. Now, if you're really attached to your paradigm and you're guarding it as a kind of protection mechanism, because if your paradigm crashes, then your identity crashes and you don't know what to do, you feel unsafe in the world, then your confirmation bias is going to be something that you cling to because it's going to be scary for you to actually harmonize with someone else because then you're risking your own beliefs. But it's actually risking our own beliefs that gives us the capacity to understand other people and also gives us the capacity to find greater truth, right? We can't preferentiate towards greater truth unless we're willing to question our own beliefs. Otherwise, we're always going to be stuck wherever we are. And this is one of the keys for communication is if you want to have a relationship with somebody that's really conscious, you have to make the commitment that in your conversations, in your dialogue, in your interactions, that you put truth first. Beyond being right, beyond confirming what you already know, you put truth first. This is the number one preferentiation in your communication is towards truth. And this will always, if both people or the group of people have truly in themselves dedicated themselves to truth first, then the conversations will always be enlightening. This will always be a situation where when you interact with each other, you're getting more perspectives and you guys are working to bring more truth forward, and it will come forward. So this is kind of like the prerequisite idea behind the key. Now, the key that I want to share with you is something that was shared by a person named Steve Covey. Now, the rule is seek first to understand and then to be understood. And this is so crucial. Seek first to understand what the other person is saying, what they're going through, to empathize with them, to really understand the point that they're trying to make. And then once you've understood where they're coming from, and ideally you relay back to them that you understand where they're coming from, then you can be understood. You can express yourself so that the other person understands you. And by doing it this way, what you're doing is you're making difficult conversations way easier. You are making sure that you guys are coherent and harmonized when you're communicating with each other. Because what you're doing is when the person expresses what they're going through, you become them for the moment. You understand where they're coming from. And then what you do is you repeat to that person where they're coming from. This is really crucial in difficult conversations, because what this does is this prevents arguments from getting out of hand. Typically, when arguments or misunderstandings get out of hand, it's because both sides of the conversation don't feel as if they're understood. They start yelling at each other, saying like, no, no, and trying to say, this is what I see, this is my way, this is how I understand things are going on. But they're not actually listening to what the other person's saying. And so then people are basically yelling at each other, but they're not communicating. So the idea is for you to set aside your need to be understood for the moment and understand the other person, really truly understand them, and then communicate to them that you understand them. And when you do that, when you communicate to somebody, listen, I see where you're coming from. This must be really difficult. I see how you're perceiving this is, this looks like this and it feels like this to you. And you can explain to them to the point where they're satisfied that you understand where they're coming from. Once you do that, somebody's guard goes down. They're like, okay, I feel understood. Now I'm willing to listen to what you have to say. But if they don't feel understood, they're not going to be willing to listen oftentimes to what you have to say, unless they're employing this rule on their side. They're not going to be willing to listen to what you have to say, because it's like what you have to say is irrelevant if you're responding to an incorrect interpretation of what they've tried to express to you, right? And so this is a major trap that people get stuck in. And understanding that to seek first to understand and then to be understood, you can kind of nip this problem in the butt. And when both sides are doing this, this really activates conscious communication and nourishes conscious relationships. But it requires you to have to be willing to be wrong. So it requires you to have to be aware if you have a confirmation bias and to dissolve that confirmation bias so you can truly understand the person in the moment, so you can truly empathize with them. So that's basically it. That is the key that all conscious relationships are using. And if you get good at using this key, at seeking first to understand before being understood and being willing to be wrong, if you get good at doing that as a conscious relationship, then your relationship will blossom and bloom. And if you preferentiate towards truth, which is another part of it, then you will always be having enlightening conversations and enlightening interactions that propel both of you or all of you forward at an accelerated rate. So thanks so much for tuning in. This is Patrick Hayes. If this video was useful for you, if you have other people in your life where you would like to up your level of communication, you think this video would be useful for them to watch also, please send it to them. I would really appreciate for this video to serve everybody that it could serve. So when you share it, I'm really grateful for that. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to put them in the comments below. If you want me to dig deeper into any aspects of this conversation, I'd appreciate if you let me know. And I'm super stoked to continue sharing awesome content with you. So thanks so much for tuning in. One love. This is Patrick Hayes, and I'll talk to you next time.